Well, listen, we're all incredibly excited to come and talk about the metaverse. I'm honestly here with three of my very favorite people. And, all of us either work at agencies or consultancies. And so today we're really going to talk about, how we've helped brands, think about the opportunity that they can find within the metaverse. And we know it's a rapidly, evolving and developing space, but a lot of what we're going to talk about today is, how we see brands navigating it and how we can, all try not to get lost in the metaverse together. So I'm gonna, let each panelist introduce themselves, their organization, and then, guys, just give us a little bit of context or your philosophy on how you consult clients on emerging technologies.
Sure thing. So I'm Mordecai. I'm an innovation executive. Most recently, I was at Hyundai Motor Group, where I created and ran innovation and partnerships. But as a consultant, I work with C-suite executives to help them practice innovation in an actual tangible way. So I actually offer out one of my services is called productizing the metaverse. And it's where I help brands engage into this space, looking at a 3 to 5 year roadmap when looking at these technologies, so they can make informed decisions with their investments and have just something that can encapsulate the business much more long term.
Hi, my name is Amir, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Anti-Agency Group, which is a marketing consultancy focused on paid advertising based in Los Angeles. And I would say when it comes to emerging technology, me and my team are always curious about the latest and greatest technology and trends. And the way that we approach it with our clients is really focusing on, is it really a brand play versus, like KPIs, ROIs, performance marketing, lower funnel? You really need to dip your toes and figure out if it makes sense for your brand and what is the meaningful experience that you're going to offer for consumers. But really looking at it as more as like test and learn opportunity versus like a focal point of performance marketing for our clients.
Hi, I'm Jonah Minton, a Senior Vice President at MediaLink. We are a strategic advisory firm that creates opportunity for our partners across the media, marketing, technology landscapes. And our philosophy with emerging technologies and innovation is really to identify a short-term opportunity to test and learn, and then ultimately to figure out a longer-term strategy, right? And the operational plan and the business model that goes along with that. And so for this emerging field of the metaverse, right, we're all doing this together as an industry, and there's so many different aspects and different ways to enter. And each client is a little bit different and unique in terms of their philosophy. So we create, essentially custom or bespoke business models and solutions for each client.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that context. So you know what, we'll dive into the questions. I think a good place to start is, so this word metaverse is certainly new, but has been getting a lot of attention. And, with anything brand new, but specifically something with so much buzz around it, I think there's like this generalized confusion about what exactly the metaverse is and what the key components are. So when you're providing, consultative services to your clients, how do you define the metaverse for them?
Well, first and foremost is I make them answer. So I send out an anonymous survey to my clients before we meet up, and I ask them in multiple choice style, what is the metaverse to you? Without fail, like 9 times out of 10, the responses I get is VR, AR, gaming, end of story. And that isn't because I don't want to embarrass anyone in room. We won't get anywhere if we just have head nods. Like, of course, I know what all of this is, as has been said in just our introductions, this is about testing and learning. So we need to be fluid in the way in which we talk about it and not feel so confined. So for me, though, the way I approach it is that we are looking at technologies, philosophies, and strategies in the metaverse, which will have a long play into what our channel marketing will look like in future. And that's what we're exploring. So it's very exciting. As I mentioned, productizing the metaverse is looking towards that. How do we live in a world when our digital selves sort of enter the room before our physical selves? That does not mean we'll always be in a headset and our self will end up being out there in a way in which we've only constructed. It means that our brands will create that universe and so on. So to me, it's simply we're building on another channel of communications. And I think we can all understand what that is in that space.
Okay, so not to beat a dead horse, but for those of us who may need a little more convincing, why is the metaverse not just like a next gen video game?
Sure, and I think that we've all probably seen the movies like Ready Player One and some of the visions of the metaverse that companies have kind of put out in terms of a 10 to 20 year trajectory. And media, entertainment, and gaming obviously make a lot of sense, right? In terms of how we can immediately visualize what the future looks like for those mediums. But really the metaverse is an extension of our world today, right? It's a virtual extension of everything that we do. And it will completely transform everything that we do, from education to health and wellness, to our work life, to our personal lives. We'll have a metaverse version of that, just like we'll have the real life version and the physical version. It will be combined and it will be seamless. And so I think the other interesting thing to think about as we think about the metaverse is it's not just a platform for us to interact with virtually, but it's also going to be a platform for us to interact with artificial intelligence, right? Which is also on its fast growing trajectory. And so that's going to have huge implications, right, for how we not only interact with each other, but interact with ourselves and speed up the way that we communicate with and learn new things and try new business models. So I think when you think about the previous journeys of Web 1 and Web 2, and obviously Web 3 and Metaverse, they're not the same terminology, but it's Metaverse is within the Web 3 trajectory. The combination of AI and this new virtual world together, it's going to be very special and very transformative. So I think when you think about where brands can play in the near-term future, right, in terms of where we are today, you've got creating immersive new worlds on different platforms, right, where consumers can show up and they can experience and they can build communities around other passionate fans. They can, transact through different different ways now through NFTs and tokens, and there's all sorts of new business models to play around with and to test and learn. So it's not just gaming, right? There are so many different avenues and platforms, and as Mordecai said, just different ways to get involved in the metaverse outside of gaming, which obviously has been a first mover and probably, the biggest player to date in terms of what they've been doing over the last several years, but so many different applications.
Great. Okay, so now that we have the definitions out of the way, let's talk a little bit more specifically about the opportunities that the metaverse provides to brands. Right now when brand marketers try to find insightful information on how to use the metaverse, they're met with like an entire spectrum of opinions, some of which are really polarizing. Even prepping for this panel last week, there was a podcast episode on The Daily. It was very dystopian. It was basically like, we could use the metaverse to escape all the problems of real life, right? And then literally the next day, I got an email newsletter from Media Post that published an opinion piece called Metaverse, and basically said, it's like a fad, it may go the way of Google Glass. So knowing that, they're getting all of this polarized information, give us your best opinion on the current and future opportunities for brand marketers.
I think when you look at it, it's constantly evolving and changing, right? And it's really at its infancy stage. But what we've seen, I think, in the past few years, you've seen many brands are dipping their toes and experimenting within the metaverse. If it's retail brands, consumer packaged good, or quick service restaurants, or even automotive and entertainment. And, from my perspective, it's really not, the opportunity is not like a pure paid media opportunity where you basically do an insertion order and you book an inventory in the metaverse. It's a lot more essentially complex than that. And what we've seen is that brands are either attempting to work with existing metaverse worlds that are popular, or trying to build upon open source code and build their own experience or hub. That's what we currently have. So, to Mordecai's point, what we've seen brands are doing in the past few years is really essentially like one of the most popular metaverse initiative is creating those virtual goods, right? So those virtual goods are the first phase where brands are either creating virtual goods to collect or purchase that you can bring to the metaverse. Coca-Cola had a digital collectible that you can actually bring to the centralized world. Balenciaga is a brand, built, four skins for Fortnite, and, took it even further and created a virtual store with a virtual billboard that mixed with actual real billboard. So, brands are really experimenting in that space. And I think, some brands are even taking it further and creating their own hub or experience. So, we saw entertainment brand like Warner Brothers Pictures that taking In the Heights and doing a block party to commemorate and celebrate their film. Or, Nike just did Nike Land on Roblox. Yes, we have to address the elephant in the room. Like a lot of brands are like their first initiative is through Roblox because that's the entry point and what they know. So they build this experience that also have components of real life. I think, in the near future, on the technology front, we need to see more adoption. And I think we're going to start to see a lot more dimensional experiences and immersive experiences. I don't think it's in the near future, but I really feel like in some point, if the technology will adopt and people will use it, you're going to see a lot more sensory experiences with brands where you essentially potentially maybe can feel or even smell a brand or even collect a digital good and print it through a 3D printer, and then on the more traditional advertising, I think you're going to see a lot more collaboration with the creator economy and influencer in those spaces. So you either create a product with an influencer or avatar in those spaces, or you will essentially create a product placement in those worlds. So that's kind of like the way that I look at it from a more, traditional paid media advertising and kind of like where the future holds.
Right.
I think that's great, Amir. And I think you covered off on a lot of the tactics and some great examples. I think the other opportunities for brands it is around understanding the community, right, that is now forming for this new generation and this new technology. It's got its own culture. It has its own language, right? And so getting involved in a lot of the examples that Amir just kind of ran through are great ways for these brands to understand that community, that culture, that language, and try to figure out their most authentic way to enter into that community with a way that's providing value, right, to fans and consumers, and not necessarily cringeworthy. And that's going to take some practice, right? And so the more comfortable that brands can be to get involved in these new technologies, these new platforms, they're going to have different experiences and be a part of that community in a meaningful way. I also think that there's going to be a lot of learning around testing and learning for brands. What does brand safety mean in this new world? What is data collection and privacy going to mean in this new world? And how do we all find comfort in that? And what are the new legal frameworks going to be? And so testing AR, VR, mixed reality, crypto, tokens, new business models, all these things are going to be so important. And no one's going to really have the answers today in 2022. But together, as we all work together to test and learn and to try, and ultimately do a lot of listening, to the consumers that are going to be telling us loud and clear what they think of all these examples, I think we're all going to be smarter.
In line with what you both are saying, I think it's also, one of the ways to frame it is to realize that ownership is different. These initial examples, Amir touched on them. It's this one product exists in one way. And the beautiful thing about NFTs in this space is it's nimble. And there's a fluidity to it that we can play in. Also, when we get into digital ownership, it's different than ownership that we think of today. So when we think of today, we see individual ownership, and that is a very controlled experience. I have this object, it is mine, this is where it stands. And we're moving into a much more collective ownership in digital, which is about belonging. We're marketers. We know how to create environments and experiences of belonging, and the nimbleness of these NFTs to the brand safety issue as well is something that we can play with, understanding that these things don't exist in one way and go out there, but it will be community-based. And what does that look like? And in particular, exactly where Jonah's talking about, data is the key to move forward. Brands have to be playing in these spaces, because by owning their data, they will be creating the worlds of the future. I will be opting in to a Warner Brothers experience because I'm a fan, and I'm allowing them to have my data, and I'm willing to go on their journey. So if we're choosing to not engage in the metaverse right now and not test and learn in this space, you will be out of the conversation when actual glasses, because Google Glass was a great test and learn, when actual glasses that work for all of us that do wear glasses exist, we'll be able to see a world that you're a part of.
Yeah, I think, the one thing we were talking about is the metaverse is just this living and organically evolving place and entity. And the conversations we're having now are going to be so different than probably even 6 months from now. So I think the strategy, all of you, the common theme was really test and learn, and just make sure you kind of have clear KPIs or a clear hypothesis on what you want to test out. Okay, so, Mordecai, why don't you talk to us a little bit more about what you consider to be metaverse technology? I think if that is one of the key parts of the definition. And then who do you see being the technology or platforms that are really going to lead the space?
Well, like I said, I mean, obviously, the way I look at it is I could go down the road of the AR, VR, and gaming. I think we know those things are operating. As I mentioned, productizing the metaverse for me came about because I engaged in AR as a sort of stunt cool activation for Hyundai, and then we brought it into a digital retail solution. So for me, those areas are technologies that are exciting. But what's really exciting to me is that, for me, I translate it as NFTs are nimble customer retention tools. Then we have DAOs, which are sort of the future of co-creation that we all have talked about today, and then we have blockchain, which is about, for me, the best is transparency. And when we get into sustainability for brands and those messages, I like to call it the rabbit hole that the future consumer is going to go down. They want to be able to have those. And so when I look at that, I'm looking at partners that are playing in that space. But, it's never going to look like one partner, because the way to Web3 is not to focus on a big four solution. Web3 is about the complete demise of that and the individual brands and consumers creating their own collective spaces. So it really has to look like a hodgepodge of that. The example I'll give is Erica Wixneed, who's over at Adidas, talked about how they're getting into the metaverse. Obviously, it's on an owned channel in that space, but when she talks about the partners, she talks about it being a new business model, membership 3.0 into Adidas. She says it's on the blockchain, which is Web 3.0. She's talking about her squad as like Bored Ape Yacht Club. It's G Money, it's Punks Comics, it's Pixel Volt. It involves Coinbase and Sandbox. That's what it's going to look like. It's going to be a lot of people at the table and a lot of partners. And that is incredibly exciting to be able to play in that, because that allows a lot of new folks at the table and a lot of new ways to, again, I'm going to go back to this, the nimbleness of this space, to be able to have a lot of heads at the table so that we can collectively move into greater places.
Right. Great answer. And a lot of, I mean, there's going to be, just to your point, so many partners, large and small. And I think, you know, even when we were discussing this, part of the dystopian prediction from that daily podcast was that the power was going to be consolidated amongst a few technologies and platforms. And I think, you know, that is likely a misconception, right? There are so many potential partners that you can leverage, that, you know, it's best to really examine all the potential options. Okay, Amir, from your perspective as the CEO of a media agency, what are your thoughts on how to identify whether the metaverse is an effective way to reach a brand's target audience? And how does the metaverse factor into your media planning?
So I think you know, the big question is like, it all depends, right? So who do you want to reach? What are your KPIs? What are you trying to accomplish from a business perspective? If you are focusing on your reach and frequency and want to really create, you know, linear performance marketing of transaction, probably metaverse is not a line item on your media plan. However, if you have, you know, your 20% brand experimentation budget of R&D, test and learn, brand play, we will definitely encourage you. Why? Because it's the next generation, right? Because inherently those environments, like the early adopters statistically, are younger, you know, younger millennial, Gen Z, and even, you know, Gen Alpha to some extent, right? So you have an opportunity essentially to reach this audiences in a very, you know, unique way to some extent, right? And you kind of like democratizing the ability to have access to your brand. So yes, it's not going to be reach and frequency at scale, but it's going to be a highly engaged environment if you do it right and if you create valuable experience for your audiences. But you know, all of this initiative around metaverse, it is like, it takes a village to build a compelling metaverse experiences, because there are many different partners throughout the supply chain. But I think if you do it right, like, you know, before our panel, there was an example how Clinique did it, and they really thought about it throughout this entire supply chain. But they look at it as a brand play and a place to create experience versus transaction. And any of their transaction was, you know, viewed as incremental. And I think I would encourage people to adopt that approach of incrementality in the metaverse and really focus on connecting with audiences on a deeper level.
Great. Okay, Jonah, can you talk to us about how the business of the metaverse will unfold over time? And what needs to happen to unlock a truly scaled opportunity for brands, consumers, IP owners, or tech platforms?
Sure. So I think, as we've seen with other technology waves, previously with Web 1 and Web 2, there's obviously a ramp up period for that wave before we reach the hockey stick growth. And we're in that wave right now where we're just all ramping up and we're all testing and learning, and the technology also is being developed, right? It's not at a scale play. And when you think about those other two generational shifts, there was a tipping point, right? For Web 1, it had a lot to do with, you know, hardware speeds and data speeds. For Web 2, it was mobile, right? That was the huge tipping point for Web 2. And for Web 3, it's going to be a combination of hardware, data speeds, software, content experiences that are being developed now. And so all these, and obviously all these parts are going to be working together to develop new business models. And I think the exciting thing when you think about the business model of the metaverse is a lot of it we won't even be able to imagine today. But there obviously are sort of three parts to it. There's the part that we know today, right? The current business models that we all exist in today in terms of e-commerce. You've got these new areas where they're virtual to virtual, right? You can buy virtual goods, virtual accessories. We're all going to have in the future our NFT versions of our NFT goods and services with our digital personas, right? So clothes, shoes, accessories, art, collectibles. That's going to be a massive new economy for brands, right? They're going to be building these digital collectibles that are going to define our digital personas. You've got new subscriptions, right? When you're part of a community and you really care about a brand, you want to be closer to that brand. You want to hear about all the unique special drops, whether they're virtual or physical. You're going to want to maybe be a part of the member. You're going to want maybe special data that brand can unlock for you. There's all sorts of new business models that will be developed as we enter into this new metaverse world that I think are really exciting. We're seeing the birth of live social shopping that's been happening in China, and it's now rolling out in the US. That will evolve in a virtual way, right? The first few years it will exist on social platforms and more of a Web 2 format, but pretty quickly, right, we'll have a virtual version of live shopping experiences with creators, with virtual creators through AI. There's going to be so many new business models that we're really excited about. And so I think it's just about getting involved in doing these tests to try to figure out not necessarily where the scale is today, but where the big opportunities are tomorrow.
Great. So I think there's a lot to consider, and some brands may be like, I'm not ready to dip my toe in the water yet. So if brands are not necessarily ready to kind of create that fully branded virtual world, or they do not believe the metaverse is an effective way to reach and engage their audience, what are some other considerations before just deciding to pass on it altogether? For example, what about brand or intellectual property protection? Hermes has filed a suit against the artist Mason Rothschild, otherwise known as Meta Birkins on Instagram, because it's an artist that creates NFTs that feature the famous handbags. So could this be a situation where you need to define your brand's role in the metaverse, or someone else will?
I think
Amir.
I think it's an interesting question. It's really about what's the trade-off, right? What are you trying to, what are you willing to give up in order to earn, so looking at 15 years ago or even less, brands were chasing people that creating memes and GIFs and taking some of their properties on YouTube and basically trying to remove them. But as time goes by, they realize that this is actually an earned media for them, and it's always on exposure, and it's actually like the highest engagement, right? You're not just advocating, you're creating something because you're inspired by the brand. So I think brand will have to philosophically decide if they are willing to, democratize the brand experience and give some of their IP legally and philosophically to the consumers, right? Because that's part of the notion of Web3, decentralization. And I think it's a hard question, but I definitely think that looking at the overall earned media, looking at 10 to 15 years, what the next generation of consumers would want, they would want an authentic experience where they can be part of the brand. So I think brands should really focus on not what's happening today of control and looking what's going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years and building a roadmap of, of testing what they're comfortable with. But it's definitely something that shouldn't be omit or not be considered, because it is here. I remember 10 years ago, it's been actually like probably 10 or 8 years ago, where people said advertising on Instagram will never work. It's going to be fade out in 3 months. And now it's a must line item on every media plan. So I think we can't ignore the signals, and we have to shift, evolve, optimize, and be agile when it comes to all of what's happening within the metaverse, because there is a supply. There is no supply, there is a lot of demand, and there is potential to create supply for customers.
I think when Amir, you did a great job, outlining that. I think that the risk and reward ratio in terms of legality, brand safety, obviously is different for every brand in every category, but the opportunity to get brand loyalty early on in these new mediums is so massive. So for the brands that are open to the risk in these new areas where we are in developing, and there's some fluidity around brand safety and privacy and data and legality, to get ahead of everybody else and start to build brand loyalty and authenticity and true sense of community is such a massive opportunity. And when you think about brands that have such devoted fan bases, it almost doesn't matter what they sell anymore, right? Because as a consumer, you have such a deep connection with that brand. They could sell anything and you would trust them, and you would be loyal, and you'd be excited to be first in line to get that product or that service. And I think this is an opportunity to get ahead of the line and to start to build that brand loyalty and that authentic connection to this new form of communication.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's always, all of us that have been marketers long enough, not to age everyone in the room, but how many times has this worked well, that brands going after creators has served them in the long run? We've seen this play out, as Amir said, in multiple ways across the last 20 years of marketing channels being new. Almost every 3 years, we have another new surge of one. When I saw these headlines around this, I immediately went into, didn't like Alec Monopoly do this to Birkins in a physical form already? It's just street artists doing what's been done, forever in this space. And what is unfortunate is, going after it in that way when it's such an opportunity to get to test and learn. I know we're really drilling this home today, but the future of Birkin and luxury fashion is that if I have my Birkin and I've gotten on the wait list, purchased, I'm in with the brand, I have a physical form, and I spill something all over that Birkin, I actually have the pattern to go and make my Birkin again, because not only did I purchase the physical form, I've also purchased a digital version that I own forever. And that is an exciting opportunity. I will always want to explore new things I can do, and having that digital form of the same bag that you have in physical will be the future. So I would maybe make a call to those lawyers and say, actually, let's be teammates in this space, because Birkin has done that before in terms of working with artists. And it would be great to see that really build out.
Yeah, agreed. So I know we've got about 6 minutes left. So I think I'm going to open the infamous Q&A widget and see what we got in here. But I would first love to thank all you guys. I mean, just such a wealth of knowledge on such a new topic. So it's really been great to participate today. Okay, so we've got a question that says, how are metaverse communities different than media audiences? Comment on the difference between engagement and targeting. Amir, I think, I feel like this is right up your alley.
Yeah, again, I think, it's such a new medium when we think about it. And, on the targeting perspective is just, there is no, as I mentioned, there is no insertion order where you can actually do media targeting here. This is really either a brand play where you reach inherently people that are in those environments or younger people, because they are the early adopters. And from an audience perspective, it's, I'm trying to figure out like, what is the parallel. So, in a casual game, which is a planned environment where you can download, and essentially like with even nowadays with a cookie-less world and yada, yada, you can still get some data of demographic, psychographic, geographic. The metaverse world, the way that it's heading is that brand will essentially own that targeting information, And, you're going to see, because some of those worlds are, hybrid between real world and virtual world, you're going to have a lot more data, but it's not there yet. It's such an easy, it's such in infant stage. So I would say when you are looking at a metaverse and looking at, in a traditional way, I would challenge people not to look at it as like target audience, reach and frequency, as you do as when you do advertising on game. I think you should look at it as, experience with audiences that are engaged based on subject matter and what they do. So it's a lot more psychographic than demographic initiatives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so next one, how and what do you think brands need to be thinking about when it comes to utility and bridging the gap between the metaverse and the real world? I think whoever feels inspired by the question and wants to pop in.
Well, I'll just say in terms of bringing it in, I think it is just disrupting the space. I gave the AR example of, very standard AR experience of a vehicle and then taking it into a retail solution. And I think that is overall where we need to be thinking about it. What is the long-term play of this technology? A lot of these things cost a lot of money in the long term. So we have to have a reason for it. The audiences aren't there that I can quantify it in just a marketing execution. I have to be able to quantify it into the business, into that space. And so to me, it's figuring that out. But I will say in regards to that, it's also important that we're all growing our agency teams, our brand teams, and so on in this space, which I know is something we wanted to talk about, which is that, when I did that AR execution, all the digital production team came with me on that and learned how to produce AR. And so moving it into utility is about bringing everyone on the road so that these technologies are no longer foreign in this space, that it's not just about the technology coming into the real world, it's coming into the business. And so that everyone's learning that at all times.
Yeah, and I think from a supply chain, right? Because it's really about, you have the people that create it, the people that distribute it. Like you have to understand all the different, path to get a really meaningful metaverse experience for your consumers, and always ask yourself, why do I deserve, as a brand, to be part of that experience? Because it is a place where users are allowing themselves to express themselves, and we want to make sure that we don't disrupt that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And I think that, as Amir, you just touched on, it is kind of a 360, it has to be a 360 approach. And if you narrow too deeply on the tech or the creative, or maybe the amplification piece, you're going to miss, the true value. And so you really have to have a 360, strategy and execution to get that full part of it all. And I think the other interesting piece is when we think about the word metaverse, there isn't one singular metaverse, right? There are lots of small metaverses, right, that are disconnected that eventually will be connected. And so as you're thinking about this as a media channel, right, which single metaverse do you want to play in? Or do you want to try to do multiple metaverses at the same time? But I think it's easy for us to kind of just picture this one big cloud of metaverse out there, and it's really not like that today.
And I would just add, it's still a very, very new concept. So I encourage brand marketers to ask questions and just be what we don't know, what we don't know, and it's constantly going to evolve. So we just have to be kind of alert and ask questions.